Have you ever wondered what it truly feels like to stumble upon a creature so small, so unnervingly aware, that it seems to peer straight into the corners of your soul? You trudge down the dimly lit corridors of a centuries-old English manor, the scent of waxed floors, old parchment, and faint peppermint curling around your senses, when a subtle shuffling from behind the kitchen door catches your attention. An almost inaudible tap-tap, like someone, or something, tapping impatiently on the threshold of your perception. This is no ordinary house guest, and if you think you can simply ignore it, you probably won't survive this unnoticed, because the eyes that flash briefly from the shadow are sharper than any human gaze, and the faint twitch of ears, almost imperceptible, signals a being far more cunning than it appears. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You push the door open cautiously, and there he is. Dobby, a house elf, whose very presence seems to bend the light around him, a strange mix of humility and hyper-alert mischief. The floorboards groan under your weight, and for a heartbeat, the world feels suspended, like the manor itself is holding its breath to witness this encounter. Historically, tales of household spirits in Britain, sometimes called brownies or domovoi, were used to explain both helpful and mischievous domestic occurrences, and scholars debate endlessly whether these stories originated from real folklore or were just cautionary tales meant to enforce order in medieval homes. Dobby, with his oversized ears and earnest, wide-set eyes, carries the weight of centuries of magical servitude. Yet there's a spark, a hint of rebellion hidden behind his awkward bowing and twitching fingers. Quirky fringe accounts whisper that certain houses, especially those with secret magical inheritances, could indeed host conscious, diminutive entities capable of extraordinary feats. Though whether these were elves, spirits, or something entirely different is a matter of spirited conjecture among wizard historians. As you step closer, you notice the subtle sheen on his skin under the flickering candlelight, the way his movements are both deliberate and jittery, like someone performing an elaborate dance just out of habit. And for a fleeting moment, you wonder what it would be like to be that small, bound by rules older than your understanding, yet aware of every inch of the vast world that seems so ordinary to you. Your curiosity piqued, you try to speak, but Dobby interrupts with a series of squeaks and frantic gestures, as if to say, "Don't misunderstand. I mean no harm. Mostly." There's a delicate humor in his panic, and you can't help but chuckle softly, feeling that strange mixture of trepidation and delight that comes when encountering something utterly unknown. The manor creaks around you, its shadows lengthening and twisting in peculiar ways, almost as if the walls themselves are conspiring to frame this magical intrusion. You realize you're witnessing history, or at least a magical interpretation of it, unfold in real time, and your imagination runs wild. What other secrets lie buried under centuries of stone, oak, and enchantments? I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, allowing the whispers of an ancient house elf to wrap around your mind and lull you into a world where even the tiniest of beings can hold immense power, subtly challenging your notions of bravery, obedience, and the quiet thrill of discovery. The weight of Dobby's life presses on you as you follow him deeper into the manor, and it quickly becomes clear that the small elf has never known true freedom. His world is defined by chains, both literal and magical, some etched into the very spells that bind him, others woven into the expectations of the wizarding family he serves. You watch as he tiptoes across the worn flagstones, every movement careful, every glance over his shoulder betraying years of ingrained fear, a reminder that servitude is not only physical, but psychological. Historically, magical households often had elaborate rules for their spirits and servants, documented in arcane manuscripts from the 15th century onward, though the veracity of these records is still debated among scholars who argue whether such rituals were metaphorical or real. Fringe historians even suggest some families maintained small, domestic magic wards to control spirits like Dobby, though these claims are rarely substantiated. You notice the tiny marks on his wrists and ankles, faint scratches that seem almost ceremonial, hints of charms that bind him to the house, invisible to the casual observer, yet painfully obvious to you now. As you follow him into the dim recesses beneath the grand staircase, your imagination paints the rooms differently. Cupboards that seem impossibly deep, closets that could hide entire armies of socks, and shadows that twist like sentient curtains around his lithe form. There's a rhythm to his existence, a choreography of caution and quick bursts of freedom, reminiscent of medieval servant rebellions, when lowly workers would quietly resist their masters through small acts of defiance, pilfering ingredients, delaying chores, whispering secrets. Dobby's defiance manifests in subtler ways, rearranging objects when no one's watching, leaving tiny notes in the corners of drawers, or hiding trinkets that might bring minor inconvenience to his masters, but enough to amuse him in a secret, mischievous kind of rebellion. You realize that he's both prisoner and prankster, and that duality makes him almost painfully relatable. Quirky folklore suggests that house elves develop a unique morality. They obey those they fear, but invent loopholes to exert agency, a kind of underground ethics that modern scholars are still trying to define, arguing whether this is a reflection of human projection or an authentic magical behavior. The smells of the house, burning hearthwood, old parchment, a lingering sweetness of enchanted treats, wrap around you as you crouch to follow him down a narrow corridor, and suddenly you're aware of the intimacy of this world, a life lived in service, yet teeming with personal codes, secret joys, and clever subversions. Dobby pauses and peers at you, ears twitching, eyes wide with the faintest glimmer of suspicion, as if weighing whether to trust that you, too, understand the subtle poetry of captivity and resistance. And in that moment, you can't help but admire him, not only for his courage in navigating a life so heavily constrained, but for the tiny sparks of individuality that peek through like fireflies in the dark corners of the manor, lighting the way through history, magic, and whispered legend. You sense, almost immediately, that the barriers between Dobby and the young wizard he gravitates toward are fragile as frost on a candlelit window. Yet the bond begins to form in quiet, hesitant gestures. A shared glance across a crowded hallway, a half-whispered warning about a falling chandelier, a sock rescued from an enchanted laundry spell gone awry. The friendship is awkward, undeniably so, like watching a cat attempt yoga while balancing on a broomstick. But there's an authenticity to it that feels rare in this house of polished floors and echoing footsteps. Historically, mentorship and bonds between magical beings and human apprentices often appear in medieval grimoires as allegories for moral development, though some scholars argue these accounts reflect societal hierarchies rather than real interactions. Fringe researchers, however, claim there are subtle indications of real cross-species relationships hidden in footnotes of old wizarding chronicles. You notice how Dobby's tiny hands tremble not just from nerves, but from the sheer effort of navigating an imposed world. And yet the young wizard, his eyes bright with curiosity and perhaps a hint of fear, extends kindness in small, deliberate ways, offering treats, whispered encouragement, and occasional protection from unpredictable household enchantments. There's a magic to watching trust emerge where it shouldn't, like green shoots through cracks in stone, and you can almost feel the air around them shimmer with possibilities, tiny sparks of light dancing on the edges of their interactions. You lean in closer, careful not to disturb the delicate choreography, noticing the subtle humor. Dobby overcomplicates a simple broomstick. The young wizard accidentally sets a teacup spinning into orbit, and both flinch at the smallest creak of a floorboard, as if the house itself is alive and judging them. In this suspended space, you realize that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in stolen smiles, in the patience of shared glances, and in the bravery to hope that someone, or something, might see you for who you truly are. Scholars continue to debate whether magical entities such as house elves are independent agents capable of forming authentic emotional bonds, or whether their apparent loyalties are mere reflections of the human's expectations. Fringe accounts even suggest that certain elves may influence human decisions subtly, a form of quiet manipulation that could be benevolent or mischievous depending on their whim. You watch as Dobby sneaks a small charm from a cluttered shelf, his ears flicking nervously, and hand it to the young wizard. A gesture of trust, yes, but also a silent question. Do you understand me? And in that moment, you feel it too. The fragile thrill of connection that transcends size, species, and circumstance. The undeniable sense that even in a world so layered with rules, enchantments, and fear, friendship finds its way through, stubborn and luminous, like moonlight glinting on an ancient silver goblet in a quiet, forgotten corner of the manor. Night falls, and with it comes a peculiar sense of anticipation. You trudge through the corridors, trying to keep pace with Dobby's jittery, almost serpentine movements, aware that the manor itself seems to shift subtly around the elf, as though the walls lean in to watch, to judge, or maybe even to assist in his mischief. Midnight is his domain, and you quickly learn that chaos is Dobby's preferred language. Socks vanish from drawers, only to appear in the chandelier. Cauldrons tip themselves with precise timing, and you narrowly dodge a flying teapot as it arcs through the moonlit kitchen, leaving a faint trail of steam and faintly glittering sparks in its wake. Historically, stories of household spirits acting at night often serve to explain inexplicable accidents or missing objects in noble households, a practice documented in Elizabethan journals, though scholars debate whether these accounts are metaphorical tales of childhood fear or coded commentary on laborers' subtle resistance. Fringe folklore even insists that mischievous elves were responsible for some famous hauntings that scribes documented with religious undertones. You can't help but marvel at his ingenuity. Dobby seems to understand every nook and cranny, every latent enchantment and weak spot in the manor's magic, exploiting them with a mix of glee and desperation. The smell of burnt toast, wafting from an overturned pan, mingles with the earthy aroma of candle wax, creating a peculiar perfume that somehow fits this scene perfectly. You stumble, narrowly avoiding a rolling broomstick, and Dobby freezes, ears twitching, eyes wide, as if assessing whether you're friend or accidental foe. Then, with a triumphant squeak, he darts off to unleash another prank, leaving you laughing nervously, half thrilled and half terrified. There's a strange rhythm to the chaos, a playful melody that contrasts with the gravity of his servitude, and you start to understand that these pranks are more than entertainment. They are small declarations of freedom, tiny rebellions that allow Dobby to assert identity in a world that denies him autonomy. Quirky historical records suggest that certain house elves developed elaborate, ritualized forms of trickery that were sometimes passed down in secret, almost like an underground guild of domestic mischief, though the documentation is sparse and heavily debated by contemporary scholars who question whether such behavior was ever widespread or exaggerated for effect. The shadows bend in unusual ways, reflecting his movements in elongated shapes, creating a hall of dancing silhouettes that mirror his defiance, his audacity, and his cleverness. And you find yourself captivated by the sheer artistry of it, the almost musical quality of objects flying with uncanny precision. As the night stretches, your heartbeat syncs with the rhythm of Dobby's antics, the creaks of the floorboards, and the whispered hum of enchantments. In this luminous, chaotic realm, you realize that courage and joy can coexist, even in the smallest and most constrained of beings. And perhaps the universe has reserved a secret spot for those who dare to turn mischief into freedom, one midnight prank at a time. Courage, you soon discover, is not always loud or grand. It often comes in small, almost imperceptible gestures, and Dobby is a master of these quiet rebellions. You follow him as he edges toward the study, where a mountain of scrolls and enchanted ledgers lies like a miniature fortress, each containing the meticulous records of his master's demands and the invisible penalties for minor mistakes, a bureaucratic labyrinth designed to keep him obedient. Historically, tales of servants subtly resisting authority exist across cultures, from medieval Europe to feudal Japan, though scholars debate whether these acts were intentional defiance or simply misinterpretations of routine mistakes. Fringe magical studies even suggest some elves developed mental shields, spells embedded into their thoughts, to preserve a sense of personal sovereignty without the masters noticing. You notice Dobby's breathing change, a barely perceptible hitch that signals both anxiety and determination, and it strikes you that bravery is as much about endurance as it is about daring acts. He nudges a parchment slightly askew, a seemingly trivial act that, in the strict eyes of his masters, would be a serious offense, yet it carries symbolic weight, a subtle claim of agency, a quiet protest that ripples through the invisible currents of magical authority in the manor. The air is thick with the scent of old books, candle smoke, and faint peppermint, the same scent that first signaled his presence, and it mingles with the tension, creating an almost tangible aura of suppressed potential, a magic rooted not in spells, but in the will to exist freely. Quirky accounts suggest that some house elves would cultivate tiny gardens of imagination in secret spaces, hiding minuscule tokens and creating their own private worlds, a notion scholars continue to debate as either metaphorical exercises in mental survival or actual magical phenomena. You observe Dobby carefully move a hidden trinket from one pocket to another, a ritual gesture that seems almost ceremonial, reinforcing his self-respect and tiny victories against a life designed to suppress him. As you watch, it occurs to you that this kind of courage is contagious. You find yourself bending instinctively to avoid disturbing his careful operations, leaning forward to understand his logic, and even smiling at his minor triumphs, aware that witnessing bravery, especially the subtle, almost invisible kind, can ignite something within you. Shadows from the flickering candlelight dance along the walls, elongating Dobby's silhouette into something almost heroic, a tiny figure standing defiantly against centuries of expectation and magical compulsion. You realize that history often remembers the loud battles, the epic confrontations, yet the quiet acts of courage, the small, invisible resistances of the overlooked and underestimated, carry their own profound power. And as Dobby straightens and turns to give you a glance, ears twitching and eyes shimmering with the smallest spark of pride, you feel an intimate thrill. The world is vast, sometimes cruel, and yet even the tiniest spark of defiance can illuminate it in ways scholars and dreamers alike will continue to debate, imagine, and remember. The manor seems to shift with every step Dobby takes, and you follow him into hidden chambers where dust motes hang like golden sparks in the narrow beams of moonlight, revealing objects that seem to breathe with their own histories. A teacup that hums faintly when touched, a quill that scribbles invisible messages, and mirrors that sometimes reflect moments that never happened, all teaching lessons that are both magical and deeply human. You sense that each enchanted object has its own story, a subtle moral lesson that Dobby absorbs with quiet reverence. And as you tiptoe alongside him, you can almost feel the texture of centuries pressing against the walls, the accumulated knowledge of generations whispering in shadows. Historically, secret chambers filled with magical curiosities were sometimes used in noble households to educate heirs in discretion and ethics, though scholars debate whether the lessons were symbolic or literal. Fringe researchers speculate that such chambers may have been designed to house spirits or sentient objects that guided behavior in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Dobby pauses before a small, tarnished mirror and peers into it, his reflection warped slightly, ears flicking nervously, as if gauging whether he can trust the wisdom it offers. You notice a faint smile tug at his lips, the way he tilts a tiny hand to trace the etchings on a desk. And you realize that magic is not just about flashy spells, but the quiet understanding of cause and effect, intention and consequence. The faint scent of old parchment mingles with a whiff of peppermint, creating an almost hypnotic atmosphere, and you feel yourself leaning in, eager to absorb lessons that are not spoken but experienced, the kind that linger long after the night has passed. Quirky tales suggest some objects in magical households might possess semi-sentient qualities, responding only to those they deem worthy, though historians debate whether these anecdotes are exaggerated folklore or actual phenomena, with no definitive evidence either way. You watch Dobby gently lift a quill, which begins to scribble an elegant, looping script without any ink, the letters forming words of encouragement, subtle riddles, and faintly humorous admonishments. It's as if the objects themselves recognize his worth and are silently mentoring him in courage, empathy, and cunning. With each step, each careful observation, you sense that Dobby is learning the fine art of navigation, not just through physical spaces, but through moral and magical landscapes, balancing obedience and agency, loyalty and cunning. Shadows twist around him like sentient curtains, highlighting the small, precise gestures that reveal lessons without a single word spoken, and you feel a peculiar thrill in watching history, magic, and life itself intertwine so seamlessly. As Dobby finally straightens, quill in hand, and eyes glimmering with quiet comprehension, you realize that these chambers, their lessons, and the subtle dance of trust and skill are as much a part of his story as his liberation, and that understanding, even in a world ruled by enchantment, can be the most potent magic of all. The air feels heavier as Dobby approaches the pivotal moment of liberation, and you trudge alongside him, heart beating in tandem with his rapid steps, aware that every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the drafty windows, is a potential witness to a life-changing act. You sense the tension in his movements, ears twitching with hyper-awareness, eyes darting between locked doors and enchanted locks, because freedom, as you quickly realize, isn't just about leaving, it's about surviving the act of leaving. Historically, tales of servile escape exist across magical and mundane traditions, from the cunning antics of house spirits in Tudor England to legendary servant rebellions documented in ancient manuscripts, though scholars debate whether these narratives were moral allegories or actual events. Fringe folklore insists that some house elves possessed the ability to manipulate chance and probability in their favor, though the extent of this skill remains hotly contested. Dobby pauses at the threshold of a closet, the very portal that might seal his fate, and you notice the subtle quiver in his hands, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The manor's shadows stretch unnaturally, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath, watching, waiting for the outcome, while the faint smell of peppermint lingers like a comforting talisman in the air. You glimpse a faint glimmer, a sock, a ribbon, a talisman perhaps imbued with some residual charm that signals a passage left for him by chance or by fate. And the delicate balance between luck, magic, and courage feels almost tangible. Quirky historical notes suggest that some elves created escape algorithms of their own, memorized sequences of movement and spell work designed to outwit even the most attentive magical masters, though scholars debate the veracity of these claims, with some suggesting the tales were embellished to inspire moral lessons about agency and cleverness. As Dobby moves, you can feel the exhilaration pulse through the room, the thrill of defiance, the tension of risk, the quiet poetry of a being so small, daring to alter the course of his life. The air seems to vibrate with anticipation. Objects tremble faintly on tables, and a candle flickers violently before settling, as if the house itself is signaling that this is a turning point, a moment where history might bend subtly toward liberation. Every heartbeat resonates in your chest as Dobby edges closer to the key moment, a delicate act of courage that demands both precision and audacity. It is thrilling, terrifying, and utterly mesmerizing. You can almost hear the centuries of servitude and suppressed will reverberate in the quiet hush of the manor, acknowledging the audacity required to claim one's freedom. And as Dobby finally seizes the opportunity, small hands grasping a pivotal token of liberation, you feel a collective exhale, the tension, the fear, the doubt dissolving into a quiet, triumphant magic that spreads through the shadows, marking the first step toward a world where he will define his own path. One heartbeat, one calculated risk, one glimmer of hope at a time. The doors swing open, and Dobby steps into a world that feels impossibly vast, each breath a mixture of freedom and wonder, the manor shrinking behind him as he glimpses bustling wizarding markets, enchanted carriages gliding over cobblestones, and vendors hawking oddities that sparkle and hum with latent magic. You trail him through narrow streets where the air smells of roasted chestnuts, ink, and faint ozone from magical experiments, and you realize that the world beyond his walls is alive in ways both delightful and overwhelming. The sheer scale of possibility presses gently against your chest, reminding you that exploration is as much about perception as it is about geography. Historically, marketplaces in magical towns were hubs of social and economic activity, recorded in travelogues from the 17th century, though scholars debate the degree to which these accounts were exaggerated for political or entertainment purposes. Fringe historians suggest that certain artifacts sold in these markets were semi-sentient, subtly influencing the desires and decisions of shoppers. Dobby moves with careful curiosity, ears flicking at every sound, eyes catching every shimmer of spellwork, and you are keenly aware that he is not just observing, but calculating, learning, absorbing the rhythms and quirks of a world that until now was forbidden. The smell of freshly baked bread mingles with the faint metallic tang of enchanted trinkets, and you feel the pulse of life here, chaotic yet harmonious, a symphony of magical energies interacting with mundane realities. You notice his interactions with passers-by, a bow here, a squeaky thank you there, subtle gestures that reflect both etiquette and his newly won agency. You can't help but grin at his earnest attempts at independence, which are occasionally thwarted by over-enthusiastic merchants or overly curious cats enchanted to hover suspiciously. Quirky lore whispers that house elves, upon gaining freedom, often experience a sensory expansion, an almost comical period of adjusting to the overwhelming stimuli of the larger world, though scholars debate whether this is literal or metaphorical, a reflection of human anxieties projected onto magical beings. As you walk beside him, you feel the intoxicating thrill of novelty, the way the air hums differently when one is no longer constrained, and you begin to understand that freedom is as much about discovering how to navigate chaos as it is about escaping control. Shadows of spired rooftops stretch long in the fading light. Magically animated lanterns float lazily above, and a soft wind carries whispers of spells long forgotten, creating an atmosphere both grounding and surreal, a liminal space where the mundane and the magical intersect. And then, just when you think the market has nothing more to teach, Dobby pauses, eyes wide, pointing to a tiny, intricate talisman that hums faintly with an inner light, a small but profound reminder that even in the vast world, wonder can be found in the tiniest details, shaping the beginning of a journey that will continue to unfold in ways historians, dreamers, and skeptics alike will debate for centuries. Friendship, you realize, is not immune to the pressures of the world, and as Dobby ventures further into life beyond the manor, you witness loyalties tested and trust challenged in subtle, almost heartbreaking ways. You follow him through winding alleyways and crowded magical squares where whispers of gossip swirl like autumn leaves, and you notice that even the most carefully nurtured bonds must withstand jealousy, miscommunication, and the temptations of self-interest. Historically, stories of alliances tested under duress appear across both mundane and magical records, from medieval guilds facing famine and revolt to enchanted covens navigating political intrigue, though scholars debate the accuracy of these accounts, suggesting that exaggeration often serves moral or cautionary purposes. Fringe theorists claim some magical beings can manipulate emotional perception, subtly influencing the bonds around them in ways that are impossible to verify. Dobby approaches a friend with a glimmer of hesitation, small hands twitching, ears alert, sensing potential danger not from overt threats, but from the fragile unpredictability of trust itself. You notice the humor tucked into tense moments. He inadvertently trips over a broomstick during a heated argument, sending a stack of magical scrolls spinning like confetti, and the awkwardness diffuses the tension just enough to allow conversation to continue, a reminder that comedy can often rescue relationships teetering on the edge of collapse. The air carries the mingling sense of freshly inked parchment, roasted nuts, and a faint metallic hum from floating charms overhead, creating an oddly comforting backdrop to these interpersonal dramas, as if the environment itself is conspiring to provide perspective. Quirky accounts from the fringe suggest that house elves possess an almost instinctual radar for betrayal or dishonesty, though historians debate whether this is actual perception or simply a narrative device projected onto magical beings to reinforce moral lessons. You observe subtle gestures, a small bow, a hesitant squeak, a carefully returned talisman, each a silent negotiation, a plea for continued loyalty, and you realize that Dobby's tiny acts of diplomacy carry enormous weight in a world where misunderstandings can escalate into disaster. Shadows twist around alley corners and candlelit windows, amplifying the drama in almost cinematic fashion, while laughter and whispered apologies mingle, reminding you that even in a universe governed by enchantment, friendship requires effort, patience, and occasionally, forgiveness. You feel an intimate thrill watching these dynamics unfold, the delicate balancing act between honesty and protection, courage and vulnerability, freedom and responsibility, each interaction echoing the timeless challenges of connection that both humans and magical creatures navigate, debated endlessly by scholars, whispered in folklore, and experienced personally in ways that leave traces on the heart. And as Dobby finally exchanges a knowing glance with his companion, ears flicking in quiet reassurance, you feel the full weight of friendship's trials and triumphs, an enduring lesson in loyalty, trust, and the subtle power of small, steadfast hearts in a vast, unpredictable world. The story winds down, Yet the echo of Dobby's presence lingers like the soft shimmer of candlelight on polished floors, a reminder that even the smallest being can leave ripples across time and memory. You follow him through quiet streets now, the bustling chaos of markets and enchanted alleys fading behind, replaced by the gentle hum of twilight magic, the air scented with faint peppermint and old parchment, and the distant laughter of friends mingling with the sigh of evening winds. Historically, chroniclers of magical history often overlooked house elves, focusing instead on wizards and witches of prominence. Yet their subtle interventions and acts of courage, like Dobby's, quietly shaped events in ways both profound and unrecorded. Scholars debate whether this omission was intentional, a reflection of societal hierarchy, or simply a consequence of narrative bias. Fringe accounts suggest that elves carry a residual aura of influence, a subtle energy that continues to affect their environment long after they've moved on, though empirical evidence remains elusive, leaving the debate open to interpretation. You watch as Dobby pauses to adjust a wayward charm, a delicate gesture that reflects both meticulous care and a lingering connection to the world he once served, a quiet balance between independence and responsibility. Shadows stretch long and soft across cobblestones, reflecting in the gentle shimmer of enchanted lanterns. And you feel the almost imperceptible pulse of history vibrating through each step he takes. There's humor tucked into the ordinary, a floating broom wobbling unexpectedly, a cat enchanted to hover upside down before landing gracefully, and a faint giggle escapes you, a reminder that joy, like courage, is often found in the smallest, most unassuming moments. Dobby's interactions are deliberate, careful yet playful, carrying forward lessons in trust, bravery, and subtle resistance, which scholars continue to debate as either authentic magical phenomena or allegorical reflections of human social dynamics. As you walk alongside him, you notice the tiny acts of kindness he leaves in his wake, a secured talisman for a nervous merchant, a whispered word of encouragement to a frightened creature, the faint glow of protective magic shimmering invisibly over forgotten doorways, all echoes of the influence he now wields with freedom. The fading twilight wraps around the city like a soft cloak, and you sense that Dobby's legacy is not measured in grandeur, but in the quiet, persistent courage that transforms ordinary moments into acts of significance. And as he pauses to glance back one last time, ears flicking with gentle amusement, you feel the resonance of his journey. Its lessons, triumphs, and tiny rebellions settle softly into your awareness, a reminder that history is written not only by the mighty, but also by those who dare to act bravely in the spaces between. The night drifts slowly over the city, a soft blanket of quiet settling over streets and rooftops. Lanterns flicker gently, casting elongated shadows that sway as if in time with the faint hum of magic lingering in the air. You feel a calm sense of closure, like exhaling after holding your breath too long, noticing how the tiniest details, the shimmer of a charm, the twitch of ears, the subtle ripple of candlelight, create a tapestry of warmth and safety. The sounds are muted. A distant owl hoots softly. The whisper of wind brushes past window panes, and the faint rustle of leaves carries the scent of peppermint and old books. Dobby's journey, though filled with risk and daring, now resonates as a quiet meditation on courage, friendship, and small acts of care that ripple outward invisibly, touching everything they pass. You imagine him resting in a safe corner, ears twitching in contentment, eyes half closed, dreaming of the day's adventures and the gentle promise of tomorrow. The soft edges of the city blur in the evening mist, the colors of twilight deepening to indigo and silver, creating a lullaby of sight, sound, and scent. Even in the absence of overt magic, there is a lingering sense of wonder, a faint glow of possibility that pervades the quiet. As you let the story settle, you feel the gentle rhythm of breathing, the calm of awareness, and the quiet satisfaction of witnessing a life transformed by courage, trust, and subtle, consistent bravery. The night encourages reflection, a tender fade into thoughtfulness, as if every flicker of light and every whispering shadow is part of a larger, unseen story of quiet heroism and enduring hope. Slowly, softly, the world seems to exhale with you, leaving a sense of peace, connection, and warmth that carries gently into your own dreams.